Welcome to this week's deep dive video. We have Scott Blount with us again from Vero Christian Church in Vero Beach, Florida. You know, he's one of those that's suffering down south. When we're buried in snow, you know, he's going to be suffering with those temperatures here. So please pray for Scott during this time.
But it's tough, man, because we're still in rainy season here. So I haven't been able to ride my motorcycle to work for several weeks now. It's torrential downpours every day. So yeah, it's tough here.
Yeah. Well, think of us when our leaves are starting to fall and the temperatures are dropping. So think of us here soon.
I will. It dropped all the way down to 80 degrees by 6 o'clock this morning. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think the high for today is 80. So
there you go.
Yeah, we're trying to keep up with Florida. All right, we're looking at Acts chapter 25 today. I'm excited to have Scott on. And Scott, what stood out to you in Acts chapter 25?
Yes, well, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. But the thing that jumped out to me is the fact that that Paul knows the game that's going on, and he's not going to have anything to do with their game, but he's going to outflank them at every turn. But every other character in this chapter comes off as a clown compared with Paul, because he knows what they're doing and he knows how to game the system and to game their system, without playing the game with them. I mean, he knows he holds the ultimate trump card, if you will, which he plays in this chapter. And I just was amazed again at Paul's wisdom, his savviness. He is, wise beyond words, really, in dealing with folks who think they have it together and don't have a clue what they're doing.
Yeah. Now, I was just reading, for 2 years, he sat in jail for 2 years. And I was just reading through, I think it's First Thessalonians. This isn't a pat myself on the back. I read through Colossians this morning and into First Thessalonians, so I can't remember which one it is, but he talks about how he's writing it in chains and he's writing with his own hand, and he wasn't idle during these 2 years.
Right.
He spent them serving the Lord, growing and edifying the church, and also, I'm sure, thinking quite a bit about what was happening with him. Thinking about those who were plotting against him, and Jesus and 22 or 23 says, "Hey, I'm taking you beyond Jerusalem. You're going to Rome." And
right,
I'm sure he's thinking for 2 years, how am I getting from Caesarea to Rome?
Right.
And we see the opportunity here. Paul's not concerned about his court case; he's concerned about his mission that God's given him. And I love it.
Yeah. It is pretty fun, and as Festus comes onto the scene as the new kid in town, he's there to try to curry favor and strike up political alliances. I mean, there's a lot of politics, going on all the time here. And so he sees this opportunity as soon as he, comes into the office of governor of this region. Then he immediately strikes off for Jerusalem, which is it's the religious capital. It's a very important city in this province. And so he knows he's got to go and try to strike some alliances with the leaders there. Yeah. And so he's working on that. Unbeknownst to him, they're wanting to work on the system a little bit too. And, we got a new kid. So he doesn't know all of the nuances behind the scenes that have gone on for the last 2 years. He just knows, Festus just knows Paul's been there for 2 years. Why did I inherit this? So they have the audacity to ask this new governor, "Hey, we'd like for you to do us a favor. We want you to send Paul back to Jerusalem so he can stand trial here." And Festus sees a little bit. He sees through what's going on here, even though he doesn't really know what's happening. He's like, I don't know. Why don't you guys just come with me to Caesarea? What he doesn't realize is they've got a group of guys that are going to ambush the party on their way back to Jerusalem with the intention of killing Paul. And again. And Gartner, in his commentary on Acts, alludes to the fact that probably some of these guys were the same group of guys 2 years earlier who had taken an oath to not eat or drink until Paul was dead. This is 2 years later. Now, I've done extended fasts before, but you can look at me and tell I've never done a 2-year fast. You know? So I got to give props to these guys because, man, they are serious fasters. I mean, they wouldn't have broken their oath to God, certainly.
Not these holy men of God.
I just that one stood out to me and made me chuckle. I'm like, okay, Scott, you're a sick, twisted individual, so this appeals to you and makes you giggle. So, but
Well, and there's another example. You have these men, including the high priest, the high priest and the elders who are supposed to be leading the people in the law and pointing them to God, are totally fine with committing murder and bearing false witness and all these other things, even taking oaths to God, which they then break. I mean, they're fine with all this stuff just to stamp out the name of Jesus and kill Paul. I mean, they will disgrace and dishonor God to stamp out Paul, supposedly for God's honor and the preservation of the law. I don't understand it, but
it's amazing how twisted we get when we think we're doing what we're supposed to do for God, but really we're just trying to do it for us. And we have to be very, very careful to make sure that our actions and our will aligns with God's will and not the other way around.
Yeah. I think any of us can fall into that, It's a slippery slope. I hate to use that term, but it is. It's what's that? The path to hell is paved with good intentions, and it's easy for any of us to fall into that.
And Paul certainly could relate to that, having been there and done that himself. And now he's on the other side and going, and I think that's another reason that he can game the system here a little bit, because he knows the mindset, of these Jewish leaders, because once that was him.
And not only was he one of them, he was leading the charge. It's like your head general defecting, and man. This passage is pretty incredible to me too. Festus, I find myself, the more I look at this chapter, liking him more, because he's clever, but he doesn't seem to be corrupt like Felix wanted a bribe from Paul. And Felix was trying to play a game to grow himself and look important. Festus looks mostly like he's just trying to survive this in this chapter. I just want to make it out of this. And but he's clever in how he tries to survive this. Paul does this thing. It's like the nuclear option. He appeals to Caesar, which had to totally catch Festus off guard.
Yeah, absolutely.
This seemed relatively small, and now he's saying, I'm going to Rome, which I can't imagine being in Festus' position, brand new on the job, trying to learn the case. In the middle of your first interrogation with him or trial with him, he appeals to Caesar.
Right. Yes, which means it is no longer in Festus's jurisdiction. It doesn't matter. But to piggyback on your thoughts there about Festus and how wise really he plays this himself, Agrippa comes into town, and he knows that Agrippa has some background in the region, and all of that kind of deal. And so he asked Agrippa, would you hear this guy out? And he's hoping at that point, he's not going to sit on the judgment seat anymore like he was to start with. Now he's trying to do an investigation to figure out what's going on, because Festus is confused about the crux of this case. And the crux of this case is that Paul is proclaiming that Jesus died and has resurrected. And that's what's got the Jewish leaders all upset. They are throwing all kinds of other stuff at the wall, and none of it's going to stick. But that's the crux of the case. And Festus doesn't understand this. There's no frame of reference that he has And so he's like, okay, did this Jesus guy die? And then you're saying he came back to life, or did he not really die? And he doesn't
Yeah.
understand. And now he's got to, because Paul has appealed to Caesar, he's got to send this case to Nero in Rome, and he doesn't have a clue what he's going to write about.
Yeah.
Okay, here's this prisoner Paul, and here's what he's accused of. I don't really understand it. And man, that's going to make you look real good in Caesar's eyes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's very savvy of him to then bring Agrippa in,
Yeah.
so he's hoping he's going to learn something else, or Agrippa can fill him in on something so he can have something to write to Caesar Nero, to send along with this prisoner, so he doesn't look like a complete idiot.
Yeah. Well, and this Agrippa, it's Agrippa the second, and he was pretty famous for being a politician, like having the right words to say and being able to spin things so that it makes him look good. And so Festus bringing him in saying, hey, why don't you take a crack at this? Pretty smart, because it has his name, Festus' name, and Agrippa's name. And now it puts Agrippa in a weird spot where, he's got to look good for Nero too. Neither of them wants to get in trouble with Nero. Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool. I joked last week with my buddy Austin about Paul and order, and joked with you earlier this morning about Paul and order, but this really is this like mix of some political drama and some court trial drama going on, where there's all these pieces, and Luke, coming into this and recording a lot of this, does such a good job of giving us a top-down view of everything that's happening in this passage. I just love it.
Yeah. I mean, I love the Paul and order analogy as well. I think it's perfect because, again, Paul he's a brilliant courtroom tactician. He's absolutely brilliant in his defense, because he not only makes the Jewish leaders look like the clowns that they are, but he also confuses the judge to the point that he's like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. And then at the beginning, before he goes to jail for 2 years, he embarrasses the Greek lawyer, totally points out his flattery, and comes from a different direction. And, God has given Paul such a mind, but that's how he's able to write, I was the Pharisee of Pharisees, Hebrew of Hebrews. He truly was brilliant. And God used that for a much higher purpose than what Paul had originally been doing, so cool. So cool. I'm looking to hear too, Jesus' mission. He was given just a couple chapters earlier, a couple years earlier, for Paul to go to Rome. We mentioned earlier again that the appeal to Caesar is a nuclear option. As a Roman citizen, you save that for when you think you're getting an unfair trial, everything's going wrong, and this is your last chance, kind of like an appeal to the Supreme Court here in the United States, but even greater, because there you're putting your fate in one man's hands, hoping he'll see the reason in your argument. And so when he drops this is not in Paul's best interest in a legal sense.
Correct.
He's already looking pretty good for Festus, because the Jewish leaders are already looking chaotic again, and like you said, he's already starting to sniff some things out there with, this seems a little weird. So if Paul had just stayed there, most likely things would have gone Paul's way. But Paul wasn't about his legal defense. He was about the mission Jesus had given him, which was, you're going to Rome. And you see that played out all throughout this chapter. And next week in 26, we'll see that played out even greater as Paul is on his mission to Rome.
Right. Yeah. There's no doubt that Paul knew, whether Festus or anybody else knew, Paul knew he was going to Rome. I also think, too, Cole, that at some point, Paul had to have been just a little bit heartbroken by Festus's response after Paul has presented his case, because Festus goes, So Paul, would you mind maybe if we took this to Jerusalem? Because he's still
Mm,
trying to curry favor with the Jewish leaders at this point.
yeah.
And Paul's got to be going, dude, I know you don't understand this, but they're going to try to attack our caravan and kill me on the way back. And he doesn't say that to him, but he's got to be heartbroken. And
Mm,
and I think at this point he's like, okay, I've been in jail for 2 years on this, which was dumb anyway. And Jesus wants me to go to Rome, so let's expedite this. I
hmm
appeal to Caesar.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul had already written the Roman church saying, hey, I think I'm coming to you. But he
Yeah,
thought he was going
yeah,
to come to them on his own free will. He didn't
right,
he didn't think it was going to be in chains. And
right.
um, we've been paralleling Paul's trial and Paul's entrance to Jerusalem with Jesus going to Jerusalem. And
Hmm.
this chapter reminds me so much of Paul before Pilate and Felix too, where not Paul before Felix, where
Jesus
they
before
say,
Pilate. Yeah,
Jesus before Pilate, Paul before Felix, and then Festus.
right,
Uh, Pilate says of Jesus, I found no fault in this man. And
right,
there's that little bit of a high, where
right.
everybody can see, this impartial judge can see there's no fault, but it's followed up in a similar thing, more harshly for Jesus, but still heartbreaking for Paul, where,
Right.
Pilate eventually caves to the mob and says, all
Hmm.
right, I'm washing my hands of this. You do whatever you want to this guy. And you see Festus here is saying, Felix puts him in prison for 2 years to appease them. And Festus is saying, hey, Paul, how about we just go to Jerusalem, see if we can't work
Yeah,
this out,
right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's a great parallel. It really is.
yeah. And both of them were so mission focused that they went with it. They
Right,
could have taken other legal means, but they went for
right.
their mission. So
Yep.
um, yeah, Agrippa is one of the most interesting people. I was going to say favorite, but uh, he shouldn't be anyone's favorite.
It should be your favorite.
No. He's this guy, it says in verse 23 that he came into Paul's trial the next day with this great pomp. He came in this big formal like parade of all these
Yep.
dignitaries and leaders, and he put on such a good show. But just like Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, his life was a mess. There was this
Yes.
incestuous relationship with his sister. He had made all these compromises. He was supposed to represent Judea and that region, but really he was Roman and had sold his people out, And as he's talking with Paul and hearing the gospel presented in these things, a lot of that becomes exposed, just like
Hmm.
Felix crimes and uh, poor relationship with his wife had become exposed. And
Right.
um, it reminds me a lot of modern politics where people say all the right things and they look the right way, and
Right.
you think finally someone that's going to represent me well, and then you find out shortly after none of those things were true.
Right.
It shouldn't have put my hope in this person.
They
And
are representing themselves. Don't even worry about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Not
Yeah.
much has changed in 2,000 years.
No, no, very little.
Yeah. But uh, one of the things we mentioned Sunday was this contrast too, in 23 between Agrippa's entrance and Paul's entrance.
Hmm.
This grand parade, and then Paul is summoned. Paul's
Right.
commanded, come
Right.
in. And he
Yep.
comes in alone. Um, yeah, um, yeah. The man of God, the apostle Paul, who's carrying with him the gospel, the one who's, again, another parallel with Jesus. He's come with a message of salvation,
Hmm.
and the people right in front of him deciding his fate, or so they think, don't see it.
Right.
That they can't see it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I mean, Paul knows the game. He's not going to play their game. All right. You want to have your pomp and circumstance? You want to do it? Okay, fine. But here's the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was crucified. He was buried. He's raised from the dead, and that's who I'm proclaiming. Now deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's not going to play the game. So,
Yeah. And with his appeal to Caesar, not only did he begin this without having to appease them or win their favor, but especially now that he's already appealed to Caesar, he can say whatever he wants to them because they can't touch him anymore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, there's like a faithful recklessness in Paul's approach. He's thrown everything to the side, the concerns of this life in this world, he's cast off because he's so mission focused. He's going to see it through.
Well, I mean, and he's even said to Festus here, if I have done anything that's worthy of death, I'm not afraid to die.
Yeah.
So Festus has got to be looking at this guy and going, what?
Yeah.
He's not afraid to die. I mean, I wasn't planning on killing him, but he's already just going like, I don't, no, I don't care. If that's what it is, then that's what it is. I'm not afraid to die. I haven't done anything worthy of that, but if that's what it is, and as I was reading through that, I was like, man, I mean, what faith that he is exhibiting there, and how are we exhibiting that kind of reckless faith, in our lives today? I think way too often we have a tendency to kind of shut down or shut up when we should just be bold like Paul and say, whatever, dude, here it is. This is what's going on. And this is who I represent. And I haven't done anything worthy of death, but if I'm going to die, so be it. And Paul has written, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So he's not worried about that. We say we believe things like that, but put us in that situation. Are we going to come through? So I'm just astounded by Paul's faith and his trust. Like we have said, he knows he's on a mission. He's got to go to Rome. That's the mission that's been given to him by Jesus. And he's going to take any tack that he needs to get there. And what happens to people along the way are going to happen to people along the way. Either you're with me or you're not, and that's okay. Either way. But this is my mission, and this is what I've got to do. And and it's not a disregard for other people.
No.
I mean, I'm kind of jealous that I'm not going to be in on the discussion next week, because it's one of my favorite chapters, in the scriptures, and Agrippa's sad line that that comes out there. I won't give you any spoiler alerts. You'll have to tune into next week's episode of Paul in Order. But so it's not that Paul has a disregard for anybody. He wishes everybody would come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. That's his desire. But but he also ain't got time to mess around with all this goofiness. So.
No, and I think that's an example we're called to learn from. There's so much there. The 2 years, what was meant to be a punishment and could have easily led to this great depression in Paul's life, was a time of focus and preparation for something even greater. And then the coming in and moving forward, you see, like I said, it sounds harsh, but it's accurate. Not wasting your time on people who are not truly interested. There's Jesus says, "Don't cast your pearls before swine," and he presents it, and it's up to them how they're going to respond. And he's not going to stay around. He's got a greater mission. So that's both sad and inspiring. Sad for those who reject. And I think of my own life. Shared the gospel with several people who've just flat out rejected it. It's not a poor understanding. It's they're not interested. Jesus says to weigh the cost. They weigh it and find it not to be worth it. And that's between them and the Lord. Paul's finding himself with his countrymen, and again, arguably good ruler, Festus, who 2 years later passes away, gets sick, and dies. He had the gospel preached to him. Didn't know he was going to die 2 years later, and it's up to him how he responds to this. We don't have record of how he responded, but
and I can also see in Paul's life, I can see that even as he left there and started this arduous journey to Rome, that in his daily prayers, he's praying for Festus. He's praying for
Mm.
Agrippa. He's praying for them to come to Jesus because he's going to tell them, "I wish everybody was like me except for these chains." Sorry, I gave the
Mhm.
spoiler alert away, but but so, and it's the same with us. And I know that you're still praying for the folks that you have referred to here, because we got to pray for their repentance. But again, it's got to be their decision. God's done his
Mhm.
part. We got to do our part. Our part is to share the gospel. They got to
Mm.
do their part. They got to accept it or reject it. But our part also includes praying for them, even if they've rejected. That doesn't mean we
Yeah.
keep going and beating them over the head with it. I mean, Paul literally left the premises. So,
Yep.
he wasn't there to hound them anymore on this, but
Mhm.
he certainly was able to approach God's throne of grace in prayer for them.
Yeah.
Again, whether they ever accept it or not, we don't have record. It'd be nice to think that they did.
Mm.
It's also reality to think that probably they didn't. So
Yeah. Narrow
it's
is the
sad.
road, you know?
Yes, yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hate to end kind of on a down turn there, but I mean that's the reality that we're faced with. We're going to have our prison moments like Paul had, maybe
right.
even literally. We're going to have times where God's using the difficulties of this life to prepare us for what He's calling us to next.
Yes,
And we're going to preach the gospel to people who will reject it. And those are realities we'll all face. And you know, my prayer for the church is that we see those difficult times as times of preparation, not just
correct,
as tragedies.
correct.
Yeah,
Yes, and that's exactly what we have to do. We need to follow Paul's example, in this, in that, there's a very specific, focused mission, and that mission is to spread the gospel. And people are going to accept it or reject it. That's up to them. But we can't be discouraged by that. We have to continue because we're planting seed, and
yeah,
somebody else may come along and finish that task for us. But we got to plant that seed, and we need to be encouraged, and just keep going. Just keep
yeah.
going.
Yep. And something I heard a while ago. It's not mine, but I liked it. They said it's not enough to preach like Paul. You got to live like Paul. And
Yeah,
you know, I think a lot of times one of the problems we run into with sharing our faith is that we've not been living it, and we know
exactly.
some of the answers, but we've not lived our life reflecting it. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much, Scott. I won't take any more of your time today. I appreciate you being on, and especially the past couple of weeks you've had and how busy you've been and everything. And I appreciate your time and your friendship as well. So hopefully you have a lot more AL8 ready to go.
I
And
I do. I do. I raise a late toast to you, my brother. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, life is busy for all of us, folks. Get over it. Okay,
Mhm.
we got work to do for the Lord. All right.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
there's going to be good times. There's going to be bad times. There's going to be challenging times. Yes, indeed. But we have work to do for the Lord, and it is worth it. I
Mm.
mean, who knows? You might even get to appear in an episode of Paul and Order. So
that's that's the highlight.
it's the highlight of my week, dude.
Mine too. Mine too. Well, thank you again, Scott. I would say we'll have you back on for another one, but we're at the end of Acts, and
Yeah,
maybe down the road in another series we'll bring you back.
I would look forward to that, brother.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.